now that we have created the player character's visuals, it's time to import them into the Unity game engine, where we will rig him, animate him, and then of course get him moving and shooting with the use of the C# programming language. So to import him into Unity, we need to create a sprite sheet. In other words, a file on which we will spread out all the pieces that make up our character. So I'll create a new Photoshop file with the same dimensions as that used to paint my player, which in my case was 7 inches wide and 5 inches long. And once that's done, I'll head back to my player file, select the head layer, grab the lasso tool and draw a selection all around my canvas. This way I can hit Ctrl+C to copy my head, which is inside this selection, and then hit Ctrl+V to paste that head in this newly made file. I'll then do the same for the body, making sure to separate the body from the head using Photoshop's free transform tool, which you can use by hitting Ctrl+T on your keyboard and then pressing Enter once you're done. This way I'll be able to slice each sprite cleanly in Unity's sprite editor window, and then repeat that process for all the other body parts that make up your character. Once all your sprites are nicely placed, hit C on your keyboard to crop your file and get rid of all that white unnecessary space. You can now turn off the background layer. This way you have a transparent background, and then export this file as a PNG inside of your Unity project. Obviously you first need to create a new Unity project and set it to 2D, since we are indeed making a 2D top-down shooter game. Once that's done, you can export your file as a PNG inside your project. Awesome. Note that you can also save this as a Photoshop file inside of your project, and every time you make a little tweak to the character's visuals, you can hit Ctrl+S to save, and those changes will immediately update inside of Unity. But for the purpose of this tutorial, I'll simply export as a PNG. Opening up Unity, I'll indeed see my player character's sprite sheet. Awesome. Selecting it, I'll notice a bunch of settings to the right of my screen, most of which you'll not need to use. First of all, make sure that the texture type is set to Sprite 2D and UI, because we're obviously working with 2D sprites, not with anything else featured on this list. Now, drag and dropping my player sprites in the scene view, you'll see that this is far from what I want. I want each body part to be independent, so I can then move, rotate, and scale them, and then reassemble my character to his original good-looking position. To do this, I'll turn this sprite mode from single to multiple. I'll now hit apply to apply these settings and open up the sprite editor. You'll see that the sprite editor has a pretty straightforward looking interface. What I'll now do is hold down the left mouse button and then drag, which will create a marquee. I'll drag a marquee over my player's head, and then do the same for all the other body parts. And there we go! I can now hit apply, close the sprite editor, and you'll now see that each body part making up this sprite sheet is independent from the rest and can be drag and dropped into the scene view. I can now quickly assemble my character and then grab my rotate tool, select my head, and try rotating it. And by doing so, I'll notice a major flaw. The character's head doesn't really rotate the way it should. Instead of rotating around the bottom, it's rotating around its center. Same for the arms, body, and so on. To fix this, we need to change each sprite's pivot points. So I'll head back to my sprite editor and notice a little round blue gizmo when I select my head sprite, for example. This is the pivot point. I can hold down the left mouse button and move this pivot point wherever I like. Again, I want to be able to rotate my head around the bottom. In other words, where the neck would be, so I'll move it right here. I also want to rotate my legs from the shoulders, my body from the hips, and my legs from the top. I'll just leave the pivot point centered for the eyes. No point placing it anywhere else really. Of course, don't forget to hit apply to save all those changes. And now you'll see that my character's various body parts rotate correctly. Great. Before setting up our character in the scene view in the next video, let's first take a look at some more useful features inside the sprite editor and import settings. So as we saw, you can move pivot points manually, but you can also place each pivot point right here. Though I never really use this, it can come in handy if you want to be very precise. Also, don't hesitate to tweak your selection if it's not exactly as you would like it to be. Simply hold down the left mouse button with the cursor inside the selection to move it around, and hold down that same button with the cursor hovering over the edges to scale it. You can also move and scale your selection via this menu, but again, I've hardly ever used this. Now note that you can also slice each sprite automatically, giving each slice a particular width, height, and pivot point position. This is particularly useful if you have a sprite sheet with dozens of sprites laid out on it, each equally spaced out. But in this case, there's no point in me using this menu. Lastly, don't hesitate to toggle on the alpha mode up here, which will display your sprites in a bright white on a pure black background, which is particularly useful if you're having some trouble seeing your sprites. Okay, that's about it for the sprite editor. Now, the pixels per unit option is used to simply scale up or down your sprites. Funnily enough, a smaller number will scale up your sprites, whereas a higher number will scale them down. So definitely use this if one of your characters is too small or large compared to the rest of your game world. Lastly, you can increase or decrease the max size. Decreasing it will lower the quality of each sprite and as a result, take up less computer power and memory. And you guessed it, increasing it will improve each sprite's quality but take up more memory space. So obviously there's no point having extremely high quality sprites if your asset occupies a very small space in your game world. Usually 2048 is great for most assets, but again, don't hesitate increasing or decreasing this. Now, I hardly ever use all the other settings found here. But if you want lots of info on each one, just click this little book icon, which will open up Unity's documentation and give a detailed description of each setting. And that's it! Now in the next video we'll rig our character. If you have no clue what rigging is all about, continue the course and you'll learn all about it very soon.